Welcome to Ambassador in the Marketplace, where we correct your misconception, we challenge your belief, and we give you opportunity to hear about things and advice that can help you to thrive in the marketplace. As advertised, I've got with me today Tina, who happens to be a safeguarding consultant who will be telling us about our experience in the marketplace. Please welcome with me today Tina as she talks to us about being an ambassador as a safeguarding consultant. Thank you. Please, you're welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So my name is Tina. I'm the founder of Kesis Consulting. So I work with every organization that comes into contact with children, young people and vulnerable adults to ensure that they put safer safeguarding mechanisms in place to protect the most vulnerable. And I'm really passionate about making sure I work with churches as well to ensure that we can put audits, we can make sure that our policies are strong and we create a vigilant community as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I kind of has a little to do with safeguarding in my role, so especially around care agency and things like that, around safeguarding, obviously, like you said, adults. So loads of paperwork and loads of things to look for there. So very excited to have you on the program. So can you tell our audience your journey into safeguarding and why you decide to start your company?
Okay, so I worked across the education, social care, charity sector. So I've always been involved in safeguarding, and I kind of got forced into positions as a designated safeguarding lead in some of my roles because I had a good relationship with the young people. So people asked me, "You've got a good relationship with the young people. Would you like to be the DSL?" So I kind of got thrown into it and had to learn on the job. But my diverse experience across different sectors and across different countries, I've worked in Ghana as well, I understood or saw examples of good practice and also not so good practice. So kind of bringing all of these experiences to life enabled me to kind of share and make sure that organizations are keeping themselves updated with safeguarding trends and concerns and making sure they create a vigilant community so that everybody involved, not just necessarily the leaders in a position or, the staff, even service users, even children and young people are aware of what to expect. So it's kind of something that I fell into, but also really passionate about. So I kind of started looking on the side of gender-based violence. So thinking about honor-based abuse, FGM, domestic abuse is something I'm really also passionate about. So that's where I started delivering training around that and then touched on the broader safeguarding spectrum.
Interesting. And now did you start your organization, as in your company?
So I started 7 years ago, and my specialism around that time was around gender-based violence. And to be honest, I fell into it out of having a tantrum, if I'm being honest. So I was working in an amazing charity at the time, but I wanted 5 extra days to go on holiday to Ghana during Christmas period. And, if you have children, if you come back on the 5th of January, tickets are really expensive. So I wanted an extra 5 days to come back on the 12th, 13th. And my manager said no. And I said, "What do you mean no? Like, I'm not asking you to buy my ticket, neither am I asking you to pay me for taking those extra 5 days." And he said no. And I said, "God, is this how my life is meant to be? Like, someone controlling how many days I get to go on holiday?" And I remember at that time I was reading a book. I forgot the name of the book. But the book spoke about, really identifying your areas of expertise and really harnessing and using that to be of value to services and organizations. So I kind of went through my CV and said, what was something that I was really passionate about, I could talk about naturally, something that people always ask me to train on, and gender-based violence came up. So I was just like, okay, at that point, I'm going to specialize in that. I'm going to start training. I'm going to start consulting. And God being God, he just opened up so many doors. I started with a great organization called Women and Girls Network. And then it just kind of went from there. So I was doing that for the last 7 years. But then I did a 9-to-5 twice during that 7 years, working with another great organization that worked with refugees and asylum seeker young people. I also utilized my skills and experience in that to kind of create new programs. Then I worked with a private organization as a safeguarding consultant as well. So again, I was able to kind of harness my skills. But then I had my daughter. And at that time, I was just like, I don't want to take her to nursery too early. So what was the best option for me is to work on my business full time. So for the last 7 years, I was known as Pokuaah Consultancy. But then I changed my name to Kesis Consulting because I didn't want it to just be about me. And I know that I wanted to make a bigger impact as well. So eventually I want to recruit other consultants so we can reach as many churches, schools, and youth services as possible.
Excellent. I like what you said there, and I think it's a lesson for our audience. So if you have been looking at your role and you're thinking, why can I not do something where I'm in control of my time? Maybe you just need to look through your CV and see what you're good at and launch out in faith. Obviously, get some advice, but launch out in faith. Maybe it's an opportunity for you to start thinking about starting your own business. Great, excellent. How did you tell us about your journey of faith? How did you get to know and be a believer in God?
I'm taking a break to ask you to please subscribe to my channel, like and share this program with your friend and network, and click the notification button. I hear you say, why should you subscribe? This channel is run with integrity, and my vision is to educate and correct misconception and myths about how to showcase your faith in the marketplace. Thank you for supporting this program, and I'm looking forward to see your comment and to read your comments. God bless.
So I grew up in the church, a Methodist church. So I was christened, had my communion. And whilst I knew that God existed, I wouldn't say I personally had a relationship with him until I got to about 20, in my 20s, 24, I think I started being intentional about building a relationship with God. Actually taking time to pray, taking time to read my Bible, to fellowship. And I'll say age 25, that's when I had a real encounter with him. And since then, it's been a journey. I haven't always been obedient. I haven't always, been committed wholeheartedly. But God has been good. And I can see, even in my most darkest times, trials or tribulations, God has been by my side. And therefore, I got to a place where I was like, I'm fed up of kind of going back and forth. I wanted to commit to him wholeheartedly. And yeah, it's been a journey, but it's been a journey that I'm so grateful for. And sometimes with me, I think I had to go through a really horrible trial, which I call at that time. But that was for me to just really depend on God. And since then, he's been my everything. Literally, he has taken me through the most difficult situations. He has blessed me. He's put the right people around me. He's opened doors. God has just been good. And all of it, God has been good. So yeah.
And we thank God for his faithfulness. And I think so. I think I can identify with when you said that we've not been obedient sometimes. And sometimes, but you're just like, but God, I want to do that thing. That thing looks good. Can I just not do that? But God is merciful. He has a way of just bringing you back. And just letting you know, well, when you're finished, I'm still here. You can always come back, and sometimes it brings you back by force. And we thank God, for his grace and for him just being merciful to us. So, how has your faith helped you in your business?
My faith is my business. I would say literally. I remember many years ago when I was still like, okay, God, I know what you're telling me to do, but I don't think I'm quite ready yet. But I was working with an organization and I was agency work at the time. And they asked me to stay, but the money just wasn't doing what it's meant to do. So I was just like, no, I need to leave. But I really enjoyed my experience here. And I remember the manager calling me in and she said, like, we've loved having you here. And I know the pay's not been that great, so you have to leave. But just want to appreciate you for building positive relationships with the women that you've been working with. It was young people actually who had been through different forms of abuse, whether domestic abuse, sexual abuse, etc. And she just said, you've done amazing in building relationships. However, this is not a Christian organization, and we noted something on your email, and therefore I just wanted to kind of remind you that this is not a Christian organization, so could you please delete this? So going back to the beginning, there was a young woman I worked with, had experienced sexual abuse, domestic abuse, etc. And I remember her coming into the office and she was just overwhelmingly emotional. And she shared about, one of her relationships that she had, just broken up out of. And I read her scripture. Can't remember from the top of my head. I believe it is John, where it says that God removed branches that serve you no purpose. Yeah. And I just mentioned it and said, sometimes people walk out of our life because they're not meant to be here. Like, you are so talented, you've got so much going for you, and you need the right people around you to get to the place where you're meant to be. And yeah, she continued crying. I kept speaking to her, sharing with her. And then at the end, she left much more better. And she messaged later on and she said, "Thank you for today, Tina. This is the first time I haven't felt suicidal. And you mentioned the scripture, but I can't remember the name. Please, could you send it to me?" So that's how the email was sent. So I said, I'm glad to hear that you're feeling much more better. I'm going to sign you up for counselling. And I know this is the right time. As you mentioned, this is the right time for you. This is the scripture. But if there's anything else you need from me, please do contact me. So very simple. I didn't invite her to church. I didn't say, read this by force or anything. So that's what I said to her. So that's obviously what the manager had seen. And then said to me,
referring to.
Yeah, this is not a Christian organization. I can see that you've done really great work with her. And for the first time, she had been known to the organization for many years, since she was 9. I think at that point I was speaking to her, she was 17. So that's just trauma after trauma. And she never wanted to attend counseling. But that was the first time she said, "I feel like I'm ready." So I was like, so you're seeing all the positive around it, and just me mentioning that scripture, that's why you're bringing me into the office. So I was kind of upset or angered. I don't know the best way to describe it. And I was at that point, God was like, "Yes, Tina, I want you to be bold about your faith in me, and don't worry what other people have to say. Stick by me." And that's the point where God said that he wanted me to go out on my own. At that time, still, again, I said I was a bit disobedient. It took me a while. But this time, I remember when I said I'm going to set up my organization because I didn't want to take my daughter to nursery. God was like, "All right, I'm going to make sure you use this time to be obedient to me." And I was given no choice. But interestingly, God on my heart, when I was thinking about setting up my business, my initial target audience wasn't churches. Like, I worked with my church. I delivered a workshop on domestic abuse with pastors and faith leaders. And then those churches kind of shared what I did, and it kind of went round like that. But my intention was, as part of my way to give back, I was going to do like voluntary training with pastors every couple of months. Like, that was my intention. But God being God, having his sense of humor, literally all of my main clients are now churches. And I'm like, yeah. So if I cannot be disappointed. Exactly. Exactly. And I'm like, God, what happened to the rest of my
where did they go?
Where they gone? He was like, "I put you in the church. Stay in the church. I want you to go to as many churches as possible." And literally week by week, I was getting inquiries from churches. I was like, "God, you have a funny sense of humor, but I'm going to be obedient. I'm going to do what you've asked me to do because I've been running away for so long." So, as I said, my business is God. It literally is God. So every day I have to speak to him. What do you want me to do today? Where do you want me to be? Who do you want me to contact? I can't get away from it. And it's like, now I have to, and I'm bold, and I love it. I love that I get to mix which was my career, to now my business, which is my purpose, which I believe God put me on here on earth to do. So I don't take it for granted. I do not take it for granted. Like, I feel so blessed. I feel so anointed. I feel so, God has literally given me everything that I've ever needed within the business that I do. So
how important is it to prioritize safeguarding and ensuring that our actions and our interaction and our operation protect and safeguard adults and children, and especially in the household of faith? Please enlighten our audience.
I say we all have a duty, we all have a responsibility, no matter what our job role is, to protect and love one another, just as the Bible shares. And it's really important that I believe as a church, I think that we should excel in our safeguarding. There's been too much negative media coverage about church and safeguarding, and I think this complete opposite of how it should be. I believe we need to get into a place where other institutions are coming to the church for advice and counsel, because we should be the epitome of what safeguarding looks like because of the principles in which we abide by. So I think it's about kind of really changing that narrative. It's about looking from an individual level, but also looking within an institutional level. We need to speak up for one another. We need to hold each other accountable. Often what happens is sometimes we try and brush things under the carpet and thinking that we can manage this on our own. And sometimes we can, and we do it well. Other times we don't, and therefore that person continues to get hurt. People continue to be, unprotected. They're not supported. They're not empowered. And this is not what the church is meant to be about at all. So for me, I strive and I believe that everything that we should do as Christians, as the body of Christ, should be done with excellence. And that includes safeguarding. So when we talk about safeguarding, it's the action taken to promote the welfare of children, young people, as well as vulnerable adults. And we're thinking about our everyday policies and procedures, including within the church. We're thinking about, safer recruitment. Sometimes as a church, we kind of, we're in need of volunteers and we don't go through the right mechanisms. Yes, they have a DBS, but does that mean that they are suitable for that position? Does it mean that they understand what safeguarding is? Do they understand the role and the responsibility they have and to take it seriously? Sometimes you kind of get confused. There's a kind of a gray area between church is meant to be a family, and I get that. But also we are in a position where we have to kind of follow also legislations and guidelines as well. Right. And we need to make sure that we do it and we do it well. So for me, working with churches, it's, as I said, God told me to do this and God has positioned me, but I want it to be more than just something we're following legislations. It's about us actually identifying that as a body of Christ, we need to do things with excellence. And I want us to get to that place, as I said, where I believe that other institutions should be coming to us for advice, for counsel, to understand what we've put in place that works so well, because we're meant to excel in all that we do as Christians. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. It was actually interesting that you were talking about volunteer, because I saw a statement on your profile and I got hooked and I was like, yes. And it says that the church should not take safeguarding should take safeguarding seriously. The church should not take safeguarding seriously when a serious incident has occurred and outside authority have intervened. You say, I will say it loud, not everyone is suitable to volunteer. And that really speaks to me, because sometimes I think we take safeguarding seriously and everybody start jumping around when something serious has happened and somebody, maybe the police or something, or maybe the parents went to go and report to an outside agency, and then we had to show that we have the policy and we have everything in place, and then everybody start getting worried. And like you said, we should be an example, not people, the organization coming to reproach because we didn't have the proper policy, or we didn't even check the person we've recruited into that position, that they are actually appropriate to actually hold that position at the time. And that is quite profound. Thank you so much. So, how do we spot safeguarding issue? What are the soft things that happen that actually sometimes we look over it, but those are little things that actually might actually be pointing to the fact that there's something going on that we need to start to maybe ask more questions to make sure that there's nothing brewing, and so that we can nip it in the bud while it's still an idea in somebody's mind. So tell us, how do we spot it?
So first things first, we need to understand what abuse is. So if we're thinking about children and young people, understanding the 4 forms of abuse that they could experience, and as well as understanding what it is, recognizing the signs and indicators. So it might be physical abuse. And sometimes the first assumption that we're going to make is, okay, maybe someone has a bruise, so that means they definitely experience some form of physical abuse. But wonder someone doesn't have a bruise. We also need to look at their changes in their character. And we need to make sure that we build relationships with the people around us so we can kind of understand these changes as well. And if we're thinking about safeguarding adults, it's much more complex. 10 forms of abuse that they might experience. Do we all know what that is? Do we understand the signs and indicators? Do we know who our DSLs are within our churches or whatever organization that we can report any concerns that we have? It might just be a little concern, but we may have the missing puzzle to a whole bigger picture. So it's really important that not only do we recognize it, we also recognize the signs and indicators, but we also know who to report to as well. So it's thinking about, as I said, changes in people's character. It might be a relationship, or you might pick up on something between a parent and a child that doesn't sound right or doesn't look right. You could hear a conversation or you can observe something. It's really important to just kind of be wary of the different forms of abuse that takes place and how this potentially may show up on a day-to-day basis. So within our church, I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on the pastors and the leaders. Yes, it's essential for them to kind of understand this. Also ministry leaders as well as children's churches, but I think congregation members also need to be trained up to understand it as well, because they are interacting, they are sitting with a neighbor, they might hear something, they might see something as well. But if we're not creating that culture of vigilance, how do they know who to speak to? How do they know how to ask the right questions? So it's really important that we kind of create an awareness amongst us all. So as I said, knowing exactly what forms of abuse there exist, understanding the signs and indicators, and knowing who to speak to. This all can create a culture of vigilance within our churches.
That is great. The only concern or the only question I have, which, I believe it must have happened to you as well, is sometimes people don't know how to handle disclosure and they're not prepared for it. How important is it to be prepared for disclosure? Because like you said, I might be sitting beside somebody and they said something and I'm thinking, and as especially in the African community, it's like, it's none of my business, just move. But it is your business, because actually if there is an abuse going on, you can actually be the one to intervene and help that abuse to stop. Or if you just go, that it doesn't sound right, but then you worry, it's like you're not sure, how do I handle this? Can you tell our audience, how can we prepare ourselves?
It's so important to be prepared for disclosure at any point. I think I always say this in my training. Sometimes when we do safeguarding training, we make it seem like disclosure is going to be like a pre-setup. So maybe someone will come and knock on the door and say, "Oh, Sister Mary, can I speak to you about so-and-so situation?" The reality is it might not happen like that. You might just be having a random conversation, or you might just be observing something. So it's really important that we listen to understand, remaining calm and collective. So this allows you to gather as much information so that when you are sharing with your designated safeguarding lead, you're given as much information as possible. So even for my own experience, and I've shared this 1,000 times, but I remember my first ever disclosure. I was just out of uni, so relatively young, and I was working in a pupil referral unit. So I used to sometimes meet my students and take them to the library, back to the Peru. So one time I was with one particular young person and we were watching a video. The video was really funny, so we were just there laughing. And then she said her boyfriend didn't understand it or didn't get the joke. So we're like, well, he must be very miserable if he doesn't understand it. Like, it's a really funny video. Anyways, later on, just randomly, she said, "Oh yeah, he doesn't find it funny, or he doesn't get it because he's 64. I said, "What?" Like, my facial expression changed completely. And I remember at that point, she said, "Oh my gosh, you've gone into mummy mode." And she started getting really emotional. And I learned from that day. Thankfully, I followed my safeguarding procedures, saying that, I can't keep this and I need to share with somebody so you can get the right help and support. Thank you for telling me. And what you're experiencing it's not your fault, but it is wrong. And it's important that we don't kind of normalize this. So I had all of those conversations with her. But anytime I think back at it, what I did do wrong is I didn't think about, being calm and collected. My body language said too much. And at every point now I say, Tina, yeah, fair enough, I can manage my mouth, but it's about managing my body, my facial expressions as well. So being prepared that a disclosure could happen at any time, but it's really important that you remain calm and collected and that you're able to just make that person speak. Don't rush them. Don't try and force things into their mouth, make them say anything that they're not prepared to say. Just give them that time, that space to share everything with you. And if you want to use that technique to kind of gather more information, tell me what happened to you, explain to me and describe. And that kind of helps you gather as much information at that point. But always be prepared at any situation.
How do we, because sometimes even the children, they don't know that what they're getting into, there's a safeguarding around what they're doing. And they're just doing it because they thought they're just having fun. Or they're just, I like this guy and I want to send him a picture. How will you advise our audience? And if we have any teenage, obviously watching, but much more for parents, how can parents actually manage this situation?
I think it's really important that we have honest conversations because of our religion, because of our culture. Yes, we forbid, we want our children to wait till they get married before they start having intimate relationships, etc. And we completely understand that. But it's really important that we understand that our children are also part of a youth group. They're part of a school, and sometimes they're fed information that they don't understand the difference between right and wrong. And whilst we're saying don't do something, if we're not having open and honest conversations with them as to why they shouldn't do it, it makes it very hard for them to be able to make that decision. And if their parents or their carers are not kind of creating that safe space, not to encourage them to do these things, but to help them understand, the consequences. I always kind of give an example because young people know them of Kim Kardashian, and we know how she got famous. But I talked to them about, at that point when she did what she did, she didn't understand, or I guess she didn't think that one day she'll get married, one day she'll have children. And there was the case where her son, I believe, he was 6 years old and he was playing Roblox, and he used this, someone used the video of what she did whilst her son was playing Roblox, and he looked at it and said, "Oh, mommy, this is you." And she was so embarrassed, she was so humiliated by it. But as I say to them, at that point, she didn't know that one day she'll get married, one day she'll have children, and they will have to face the consequences. So whilst I understand as Christian parents, we want to say, don't be having boyfriend and girlfriend, don't be sending pictures. Yes, don't be, but help them understand, not just from the biblical perspective as to why they shouldn't do that, but also think about morally how can it affect their future as well, thinking about their aspirations, places that they want to be in the future, it also can be affected. So it's really important that we have these honest and open conversations with them at home, because if we're not giving them that kind of safe space to talk about it, then they may be asking their friends who may not know any different. They be looking on the internet, and we know social media might not always give, the best advice. So if I can't speak to mum or dad, I'm going to be using the internet or social media. I'm going to be asking my friends, and then it just goes from there. So it's really important, yes, whilst very firm that you shouldn't be practicing this, these are the reasons why we encourage you not to. And have you seen the consequence of this person? And be relevant to their, their pop culture, what's happening around them, so you can actually relate to them. But sometimes you kind of bring our old school ways, and our old school ways doesn't work in this society. So as I said, I'm not encouraging you to have a conversation with them to tell you to do these things, but it's really important that we kind of relate to them as best we can, and we can help them understand the wider consequences of their actions. So yes, you might think you like this boy now and you're going to be with him forever, but the reality is by the time you even get to university, you might not even see them ever again. Do you really want to share something so intimate with someone that potentially could be sharing your images around to other people? Potentially, who knows whose hands these images can get in front of? Have these conversations with them. So yeah, for me, it's about creating that safe space and helping them understand the long-term consequences. And obviously, we can bring on our biblical references as well.
Thank you so much for that. It's quite interesting. And I what you were saying about the household of faith, that sometimes you don't want to have the conversation. We use the old ways, And the old ways is that you do what I say, you don't question me kind of way. And the child was like, well, if you can't explain to me why you don't want me to do what I'm doing, then I'll do it, because I don't know what is wrong about it. And you haven't told me what's wrong. And I seem okay with what I'm doing. And so it's important that we are able to sit down and explain to them. Which brings me to my actually next question, that there are some people of African heritage or Christian living in denial and don't want to talk about sexual abuse. What would be your advice or initiate a conversation about sexual abuse at home, especially for very young children? I must say I'm one of those old school that I really struggle at what age you should have this conversation. And now you can actually have this conversation. The only challenge is that they're having the conversation because they're doing sexual education in school. And you want to obviously let them see your own perspective from your perspective of faith. But then you're thinking, okay, they're too young, or they're too old. So how do we break it down, especially from the young children and adults, not adults, like teenagers who are in secondary school? Please enlighten us.
So we, first of all, can't even deny that sexual abuse doesn't exist. If we think back from Genesis with the rape of Dinah, it's been something that's always been around. So it's important that we have these conversations with our children and young people as early as possible. So one resource that I share personally, that I've used as well as professionally, is a video on YouTube called Pantosaurus, and this just teaches children about their private parts. Their private parts belong to them, that no one should encourage them to keep secrets, etc. So I remember I was creating a lesson plan for a group of year 8s that were going to educate about this, but I was with my 6-year-old niece at the time, so she was just being inquisitive and asking, oh, auntie, what's this about? So I used that opportunity to kind of teach her also about sexual abuse in the most subtle way. As they get older, the conversation gets a bit more complex. But we watched the video, and then we spoke about it briefly, cut out the letters, tried to make it as creative as possible. But if you've ever watched this video, it's a very catchy song. So she was there busy dancing. So I didn't think anything of it. So I said, we'll bring this back another time. A couple of months later, we went to a family friend's barbecue, and my niece is very tall for her age, and a family friend must have tried to embrace him, like, oh my gosh, you've grown so much. And she stepped back and she said, no, my body, my rules. So that's another resource that we used as well. And she looked at me like to get some reassurance, auntie, did I do the right thing? And I was like, yes, that's my girl. But sometimes growing up in an African household, like, small girl, you don't respect, etc. And so I was like, it's not like that. Like, it's really important that we educate our children about, we have to understand to respect their boundaries. We can't be forcing them to do things that they're not comfortable with, because there might be somebody who will manipulate them in using the same kind of things that we say to them on a day-to-day basis. And the person I was speaking to, he was just like, this is so important, because he remembers, back in Ghana as well, when he was a child, his sister was sexually abused by their neighbor, and him being the younger brother, he said he felt so helpless at that time because he couldn't do anything, and he saw the impact that it had on his sister, that affected her mental health, etc. So we can't deny that sexual abuse exists. As I said, it's been there since the very beginning of time, Genesis. We encounter it, and it's something that is part of our society, unfortunately. So it's important that we have to educate our children as much as possible. So if they're uncomfortable around somebody, they should be able to tell us. Sometimes we like to kind of, put them in their place, like, don't talk about uncle like this, or don't talk about auntie, because aunties also can be predators as well. Don't talk about them like this, or respect. But if a child's telling you they don't feel comfortable around somebody, please do believe them. So it's important that we have these conversations with them as soon as possible. If we're thinking about the UK, 1 in 20 children have been victims of sexual abuse. Now, these are children who've had the opportunity to disclose this. Imagine the children who haven't. So the numbers are definitely much higher. So thinking about within every state school, there's probably like 30 students in one class. Thinking that 1 in 20 have been victims of sexual abuse, it is alarming. So I understand that it's a very sensitive topic and it can be uncomfortable. But what's more uncomfortable making your child empowered to kind of understand what sexual abuse is, because if they've never had a conversation with anybody, they might think this is what happens to every other child. It's normal, and they don't understand what they're experiencing is wrong as well. So if we're going to think about this, it's better, let me get out of my comfort zone and have these conversations. So if my child was ever in a situation where someone made them do something, or they saw something that they knew was wrong because I taught them it was wrong, I will be the first person they will come and speak to about it. But often hiding it, pushing it under the carpet, it doesn't our children absolutely no good. And it's unfortunate, until we can do more to kind of attack the perpetrators and abusers from doing it, we need to educate and empower our children as much as we can, so that they recognize the signs, so that they can speak to us as well.
It's been an enlightening moment for me, and I'm sure it's the same for our audience. And I'm sure there are church leaders who will be watching or are watching, and I'm sure they're taking notes and looking at their policies and procedure, and obviously looking at, is there anything else they should be doing, or is there anything else they need to start looking into in terms of the people that volunteered, and how, even the DBS, depending on which organization you are. Some people, they only do DBS when somebody comes into the organization. After that, they don't. And even if they do DBS, some people, they only do every 3 years. Anything can happen within 3 years. So very important, and is key to actually supporting children, because like you said, it affects their mental health, and it affects how they actually thrive. We are now at that time in which I will ask you to obviously tell our audience about your products and services, how they can reach you. If you do mentoring, like you said, you do training for churches, and any other, if people can reach you on a one-to-one, or if somebody is looking, I know, you were sharing about how you stumbled into the role, and I'm sure maybe some people are here thinking, I've been doing safeguarding, I've never thought of, launching that way, and they want some coaching from you, how they can obviously start out their own and start thriving in their own industry. So please, tell our audience about your products and services.
Thank you. So Kesis Consulting, we obviously deliver audits. We do training as well as advising. So our training, which is the most kind of sought after service that we provide accredited training. So children and adult safeguarding training. So this is for pastors, ministry leaders, children's church workers, youth workers, etc. And this covers all forms of abuse, how to spot the signs, how to spot the indicators, recording information, reporting. So it makes you very confident in your roles and your responsibilities. We also do designated safeguarding lead training. This is also accredited as well. So this is for every designated safeguarding lead, as well as deputy safeguarding leads within churches. So we're thinking about threshold documents. We're thinking about how to make referrals, and making sure you kind of create a safe environment for everyone in the church, but also provide support to those who work under you as well. And we also do safeguarding conversations. So this is when we take over sermons and we literally educate the whole church on how to spot the signs and create awareness. It takes the whole church, as I said, to kind of really be vigilant, to kind of be supportive, empowering of one another, and that we can ensure that as a church, we are able to kind of put ourselves there as a church that takes safeguarding seriously. So we cover all areas. And we also help with policy writing, policy reviews, etc. So you can book in a free consultation on our website. So just type in www.kesisconsulting.com, KESIS, which stands for Keeping Everyone Safe in Society, consulting.com. Follow us on Instagram as well, Kesis Consulting. You can also follow my LinkedIn page, Team Pokuaah, where I share all the insights I do regarding safeguarding. So yes, thank you.
Interesting. I was thinking, what does Kesis stand for? Well, I wasn't sure whether to ask. I was like, is he a name? It sounds like a name, so it's quite good that you actually. Thank you for actually mentioning it. Come again.
I said it was inspired by my daughter. So my daughter's name is Keziah, and then I wanted to get a name that was related, and my husband actually came up with it. So he was like, Kesis. I was like, what does that mean? And it was like keeping everyone safe in society. I was like, oh, amazing. So yes.
Lovely. Excellent. Thank you so much. It's a privilege, is an honor to obviously connect with you, and I believe our audience will definitely connect with you. And if there is anyone that you're not quite sure, and you just want an advice, like Tina said, please log on to the website and book yourself a consultation, and then you can take it from there, whether what you need to do next. And I'm sure my guests will be more than willing to support you. Again, thank you again, and God bless.